Okay, kia ora everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here to speak, and it's been very inspiring to hear the range of research that's going on at the moment. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Cook Island. My dad is from Rarotonga, the village of Nikau. My mum's Balangi. She's a bit further south, originally from Te Kuiti. And then they moved to Auckland, had me, and so I'm a bit of a cultural fusion, which is how I talk about my research as well, as a fusion of different methods and schools of thought. But today I don't focus specifically on suicide prevention, but the stuff that I work on speaks towards how protective factors that we need to be encouraging amongst our communities. Just a working. Yeah, cool. Just a little bit of overview. So I'm going to talk about a scale that I developed to assess identity and well-being, and then just looking at some of the analyses that I've been conducting. Cool. And so then I'll also look at some analyses looking at the protective properties of identity and some other analyses that I've looked at which I haven't done anything with because they require a bit more fine-tuned research, but I'll just talk briefly about them as well. So this is going to be a bit stats heavy, but the message behind the stats is the most important thing that we need. So the scale I developed is an integration of psychological theories of identity and well-being combined with a lot of the specific research that we have out there that explores how we view ourselves and view our world. The scale at the moment has got 6 factors with 35 items, and it's been developed through 3 studies. The first 2 studies were the initial development of the scale, in which there were 5 factors, and then the study 3 introduced an additional factor which I was unable to capture in the first 2 studies. It's based, in a sense, on the Fonofale model of health, and so in this way the Pacific Self and viewing and understanding health is holistic, and so we need to be able to capture that in the tools that we're using with our communities as well, which is a big critique that I've had of the tools that we've had in psychology in the first place, which are primarily geared towards a Western point of view. And so with the Fonofale model, what we're doing here is looking at the individual as a whole and the different aspects of their lives and how they are all related to each other. And so we've got family at the bottom as the foundation of our fale, our culture as the roof that protects us against all the things that come in and out through the environment, time and the context that we find ourselves in. And our family and our culture are connected through our physical bodies, our spirituality, our mental well-being, and other aspects as well, which include our gender, our age, our sexualities. And so that was kind of like a guiding, over-guiding principle that I use in the development of the scale. And we've got 6 factors at the moment, and so people respond on the 2 well-being factors from 1 to 7 scales. So it's pretty much like a survey. I'll go through each one individually. And so this is some of my family, a very stereotypically large Cook Island family. And this represents, sorry, it's a bit weird looking, perceived familiar well-being, which is our first factor that looks at satisfaction in different aspects of our family. So people are asked to rate their satisfaction with relationships with their parents, the respect they get with their family, within their family, communication, happiness, and security. Being a minority group in New Zealand, we often have to contend with a lot of pressure faced by the society that we live in. So we do have a factor looking at societal well-being as well, which looks at satisfaction with New Zealand society at various levels. So the government's personal needs being met by your community and your relationship with New Zealand society. And then within this model, we do have measures geared towards more ethnic and cultural factors. So that's my friend Savira, who got a photo taken during the Rugby World Cup. She's a very proud Fijian, and this is looking at a scale sub-factor of group membership evaluation, which is trying to get an understanding of how people value their Pacific identity is a centrally defining aspect of their identity, and also the positive affirmations that they have with that. And there's some sample items in there, so people are asked to rate how strongly they agree with those items. The next one, religion and spirituality is very, very strong within our Pacific communities, and this is often something that is missing within our measures that we use to assess identity and well-being. And so we have a factor here that looks at the extent to which religion is viewed as part of a Pacific identity here. That photo on the left, I think it is a great way to view how religion has been adopted within our culture. So that's, I was at a church in Tonga, and it's a statue of Jesus, and he's wearing a daovala. And so Jesus didn't wear a daovala, but he does now. It's a really great way to see the way that Pacific cultures have integrated religion into everyday life. This one here is looking at a sense of belonging, which is very important for identity, having a sense of belonging with our communities and with each other as well. That photo was taken in Mangere Town Centre, where they have Zumba classes, and there's the mama there going for gold. And finally, we have a measure of cultural efficacy. So this was a bit problematic to get, because measuring how people participate in their culture as an aspect of their identity becomes quite problematic, especially when we're talking about language, because a lot of our communities, people in our communities are not fluent in their languages. And so we took a broader approach and looked at people's self-perceived efficacy in taking part in their culture according to their own personal perceived way of what that means, rather than ascribing to them what that is supposed to be. So how are our communities doing? So basically, we have this measure now, but we didn't have the information about how people are scoring, or what our communities are doing, or what they look like. So what we did here was just basically compared each of the scores on each factor between each and every ethnic group, and if the scale was working in the way that I designed it to work, we shouldn't see too much difference. And basically what we saw is that the psychometric properties works well for each specific ethnic group. That was assessed here, so I'm only focusing on the four largest ones, only because of the numbers that I had, and it's showing that it is working well for the specific groups. And so although it's a Pacific scale, we do have the capacity to use it for specific ethnic groups within the Pacific communities. And so here's just a graph showing the scores between the Tongan, Samoans, Cook Islands and Niueans. And there's no significant differences between each of the factors, but what we can see is differences. Perceived societal well-being is much lower compared to perceived familial well-being, which is not surprising, because society isn't really geared towards fostering our Māori and Pacific identities and well-beings as much as it could be. However, there was a difference in the religious centrality factor, where Tongans scored higher than both Niueans and Cook Islanders, and which mirrors the religious affiliation rates that we're seeing in the census. Religious affiliation is decreasing across all groups, and is more pronounced within Niuean and Cook Islanders, who have been in New Zealand, who have a different history with New Zealand compared to our Tongan and Samoans. But it's still relatively high overall, so we're still very religious groups, but it's important that we notice the differences that are existing between our Pacific groups. So how can we use this to inform research? And so what we did here is, before the sixth factor of cultural efficacy came about, I looked at how the factors are related to each other in like a broader sense. And so this figure here looks at how the 5 factors are related to each other at broader, more abstract levels. And what we see is there's 2 larger superordinate factors of identity and well-being, which is what we should see, because it is an identity and well-being scale. But as they get more and more specific, we get to see how they are related to each other in more fine-tuned representations of what those factors actually represent. And what we see, quite interestingly, is familiar well-being comes out quite strongly by itself. and remains consistent all the way through to its most fine-tuned representation. But religious centrality and embeddedness, this one emerges jointly from two broader factors of identity and well-being. So it looks like it's kind of acting as this link, bridging link between the way that we define ourselves and the way that we feel about ourselves. It's occurring somehow through religion, which if we look at the Fonofale model, family and culture are connected through our spirituality as well. So we can use this as a way to guide the way we do research and relate the factors of this scale to the protective and risk factors of suicidality. And so we can look at families and social supports, look at the relationship of those factors to romantic relationships and the breakdown of those romantic relationships and what they have on individuals. Also looking at a culture of stress. And we can use this tool in longitudinal research to track people over time, and it will just give us more information on how we can look at who is at risk for particular outcomes, where are they based in New Zealand, and when is this occurring. So does it, for instance, a longitudinal study that I'm involved with looks at attitudes and values, and we have data that shows what happened to the people of Christchurch before and after the earthquake. And so we're looking at the resilience that happened in that instance. And so we can do this, look at our communities that are affected by suicide, and look at what we can do to protect them based on data like this, which I don't have at the moment, unfortunately. But how are our identities and well-being related? So I've done some studies applying, basically trying to answer some of these questions. One that I'm working on at the moment is looking at the effects of discrimination, ethnic discrimination on well-being. And so we know that perceived discrimination has a negative effect on psychological well-being, and it also has a negative effect on our physical health outcomes as well. So if we try to understand it as a stress and coping framework, discrimination is a stressor, and it instigates physiological responses. Over time, that's going to have a negative impact on physical health as well. However, ethnic identity is also positively associated with well-being. So if you identify strongly with your ethnic group, we often see that it has associated with positive well-being outcomes. So what happens when your ethnic identity is the source of discrimination? So people are discriminating against you on the basis of your ethnic identity. And so what I'm looking at here is how these two interact with each other, with the idea that ethnic identity is going to protect us against the negative effects of discrimination. And so I looked at how group membership evaluations of how people value being part of a specific group and as part of their identity, and discrimination interacts to predict family satisfaction and also satisfaction with health as well, but I'm just going to focus on family satisfaction here. So there's quite a few people in the study. Just skip over these a bit. So this is the main thing here. What this shows is the red lines are people that scored higher on the group membership factor. So this is the people with stronger ethnic identity. And the blue line represents people who scored lower on that scale. And then when we look at whether they perceive low or high levels of discrimination, focusing first on people with lower group membership evaluation, what we see is that high levels of discrimination that they perceive is associated with a decreased in their satisfaction within their families. We see the same pattern of results with satisfaction with health as well. However, with high group membership evaluation, so a stronger identity, what we see is no effect based on whether you're perceiving low or high levels of discrimination. And so what is happening here is that a stronger ethnic identity is buffering the effects of discrimination, so protecting us and protecting our well-being. we replicated this in the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study, which is a longitudinal study. There's going to be going for about 20 years, and at the moment there's about 18,000 people involved in it. The Pacific sample in here is not as strong as it could be, but we've got about 400 people that have completed every single time point at the moment. On the side is just like where everyone in New Zealand is located within the study. And so I replicated this. So this is my sample, this kind of snowball sampling. I had to rely on my networks to get that sample. But here, this is a nationally representative sample. And we found the same pattern of results using Western measures though. So high ethnic identity centrality was associated, buffered the effects of discrimination across a nationally representative sample. So there is evidence to strongly suggest that our ethnic identity is a protective factor against well-being. One other thing that I've been very hesitant to talk about is looking at something that I found which showed that the relationship between some of our identity factors and a measure of psychological distress, which is the Kessler scale. So this is a measure of anxiety and depressive symptoms. So I just had to speak to these numbers because I just did this last night. So what we're seeing here is, as a whole, Pacific group as a whole, age, household income, family satisfaction, and cultural efficacy are all associated with decreased symptoms of anxiety and depression, except for religious and centrality, which is associated with an increase in anxiety and depressive symptoms. And I had no explanation for that apart from saying that perhaps it's not religion, but maybe more behaviours associated with our religious practices. And so I was just, my polite way of saying that maybe our tithing practices are putting unnecessary financial distress on our families. But I thought, okay, I better try and understand this in a bit more detail, and so I ran like a multivariate regression thingy, looking at 4 major Pacific groups that we have here, and what we see is that it is occurring for Tongans. So there's something going on here within our Tongan communities to do with the way that they view religion as part of their identity and psychological distress as well. And so that's also controlling for income within there as well. And so I didn't know what to make of it. I still don't know what to make of it as well. But what I think this is really speaking to is the importance of recognizing the specific things that each of our Pacific communities are facing and the ways that they are viewing their identity and the factors that that is going to have on their well-being outcomes. And so using a measure of the Kessler scale, which really looks at anxiety and depression symptoms, which could be a risk factor for depression, we can start to identify what is going on in our communities and how we can then appropriately respond to them in ways that are more effective to the specific cultural needs and values of our communities, rather than a broader Pacific approach. We can take a more specific Tongan approach to addressing Tongan suicide, which is happening at the moment. I've seen a lot of things out there that are going on. And also, I just wanted to say, back to this one here, so one thing that I have really enjoyed about this symposium here is, even though this is a good thing, our identities are protecting us against well-being, I was having a discussion with my supervisor saying, it's good, but what this does is it allows discrimination to continue. So if the thing that we are being discriminated against is protecting us, that's not addressing the discrimination that is actually happening. What it is doing is just protecting ourselves, protecting our well-being, not addressing the problem that's going on. And so I like talking about resistance now. And so I also have a few bit of interest in political psychology and collective action, so looking at how we can use identity to create collective action to resist discrimination, which is just something that came out of the symposium, which I think will be beneficial to the well-being of our communities as well. Also, this is just focusing on ethnic discrimination as well, so sexuality is another thing, and something that part of our identities that is discriminated against as well. And so I strongly believe that this is going to apply to our takatapui, our whakawhine, our whakaleiti communities as well. So the discrimination that they face, how we can use their identity as a source of protection and a source of resistance as well. But that's me. This is the team that I work with, so there's huge numbers of us, and we've got a specific Māori focus that we have within our study as well. So we've got a few Māori researchers. I'm the only Pacific researcher at the moment, but yes, that's me. Thank you very much. Me take Martin.